Able to share?
Yes.
Yes, you can share now.
Okay. Hello. Oh, why am I at the very last? Welcome. Today we're going to talk about the terrain we live on, and you can hear me, correct? George, can they hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. But one of the things I wanted to show you, well, several things, but one of the things, there's a guy, really great geologist from Alabama. He wrote a killer book called Lost Worlds in Alabama Rocks, and his name is Dr. Lacefield. And one of the things he talks about are the evolution of rivers, and especially the Tennessee River. And in looking at some of the maps he has in his books, I was able to discern, and I've often wondered, where did the Chattahoochee River go when it used to be blocked by the Pangaea Mountains that you see I've written here? So there were these incredibly tall mountains here, yet the Chattahoochee River was flowing somewhere. Well, it flowed into Alabama and turned into the Black Warrior Basin, is what he thinks. And the University of Auburn has done a lot of study in the deposits made in this Black Warrior Basin. And they compared those, the sediments that they were seeing in that basin to those that are in Bangladesh coming out of the Himalayas, and used them to estimate the mountains that this earlier Appalachians might have been. So what they came to a conclusion is that today the modern Himalayas are about 29,000 feet, and the modern Appalachians are only at the highest about 7,000 feet, but they think that the Appalachians once were as much as 36,000 feet. And here are the two Auburn professors who have this idea of how giant these mountains would have been. And if you think of it in a purely physics kind of test, that if you have a relatively large body, i.e. India, and the ocean around it driving into Asia, and it pushed up the Himalayas, what would happen when you have the whole continent of Africa colliding with North America to push up mountains? And so that's part of why it has been thought that there must have been truly phenomenal mountains. And the other reason I was showing you that the Chattahoochee is to give you an idea of how long the Chattahoochee has actually been out there flowing. So we're talking maybe as much as 350 million years there's been a Chattahoochee. And we'll get back to the Chattahoochee later in the class, because it does flow across the Tugaloo terrane that we live on. We had a question about how did these terranes get names, and I Googled to find out where do these terrain names come from. So there's actually a community in North Carolina called Cat Square, and that is just like to call these things the type locality of the Cat Square terrane, essentially. So it's just northwest of Charlotte, and these yellow lines, I'm kind of roughly showing you the boundaries of the Cat Square terrane. And so it was volcanic island arc that smashed into North America, as we learned last week. And this is the Cow Rock, and we're going to talk about it really more next week. And I'm not certain of this, but it seems one of the things I like about geology, it's really truly logical, that you have a straight line, you think you will slip fault. You have a very curvaceous line between rock bodies, that's going to be a thrust fault of some sort, and that you have these layers of rock that are then stacked and eroded on top of each other and erode into irregular patterns, where a strike slip, you're going to have long vertical faults that then erode in still somewhat straight lines, like the Brevard fault zone is more or less a straight line. Anyway, so that's my little insight on curved lines and straight lines of rock boundaries. This is another, and the Cow Rock, there's a mountain in North Georgia called Cow Rock Mountain. The Cartoogechaye terrane is a little township again in North Carolina, just southwest of Franklin, North Carolina. So all these places, these type localities of these terranes are real places where usually you first began to formulate this idea that this is a continuous rock, this is a formation, this is a terrane, those types of things. Even down to minerals. Our minerals are given names that generally relate back to where it was found. Like I think I mentioned to you here weeks ago about Atapulgos, Georgia, and a clay mineral called Attapulgite, which is a kind of like a clay. So anyway, we're going to talk mostly today, or all of today, about the Tugaloo terrane, and it even has a type locality too. And there's an area up in northeast Georgia, Tugaloo Lake, Tugaloo River, Tugaloo community that this is named for. And this terrane, I mentioned to you before, I think that it did not actually collide with us here in Georgia, but somewhere further into the northeast. We think it came ashore in like the mid-Atlantic state area and was quickly followed by then Africa colliding with North America, and they in colliding kind of acted like a scissors kind of closing and pushed the Tugaloo to the southwest along strike slip faults, much like this San Andreas is moving Los Angeles to the northwest. So this is a geologic map of Georgia, coastal plain, Piedmont, Valley and Ridge. What you notice in the Piedmont are these long, they look kind of like they've been smeared onto the map. And that's that folding and uplifting and erosion they appear as smears. But these are the three up here that we'll talk about more next week. The Cow Rock, the Cartoogechaye, a great Indian word, and the Dahlonega. And those all came together basically as one. These two, the Cow Rock and the Cartoogechaye, were seafloor that were pushed up when this island arc of the Dahlonega Gold Belt came ashore, crashed into North America. The Tugaloo essentially is all three of these kinds of terranes mixed together, but it's not as easily differentiated, so they just lump it as one. But it is, again, another volcanic island province that with its seafloor came ashore, crashed into North America. And I compare this one because it seems on paleo maps that I've seen that it was more like what Indonesia looked like today, and that's what Georgia looked like back when in the mid-Atlantic, when Tugaloo terrane crashed in. And then it, as say Australia one day will also begin to uplift more of Asia, then that would be like Africa colliding into us with India, the Tugaloo smash between what we talked about last week in the Cat Square in Carolina and what we'll talk about next week with the Dahlonega, Cow Rock, and Cartoogechaye. So this is the orogeny in which the Tugaloo terrane, and these pieces all around here are Tugaloo terrane crashing into North America. And North America still at this time is tilted or rotated 90 degrees clockwise. So Canada is really to the east and the United States to the west, rather than Canada to the north and the United States to the south. And they'll rotate after Africa collides with us. And again, we're still on the equator, so we're still a tropical paradise. And Georgia's down here in these islands, like I was saying, kind of like Indonesia, and volcanic in origin. And along with those volcanic islands and the sediments that are coming off of them, there's sediments coming off of North America and being placed, put down in these shelf areas, limestones and such. But there's also deep trenches, and all these types of rocks can be found in the Tugaloo terrane. And then later, melted rocks then cooled beneath the Tugaloo to form things like Stone Mountain, etc. So this again is this map that I found that I really love, that shows these terranes of the Southeast and their extent across all the states of the Southeast. Here's Georgia and Alabama, Tennessee up here, North Carolina and South Carolina. And as we found out, Cat Square is a place right about here. Tugaloo is a place right about here. And Cowrock and Cartoogechaye are up here. And Dahlonega, we all know where that is and why it's called the Dahlonega Gold Belt. This map even shows thrust faults versus strike slip faults, etc. And this cross section better shows that. And I find more and more to talk about on this cross section each time I look at it, because one of the great things is they've dated all these movements, the last movement of these faults. So what you're seeing here are when the supercontinent before Pangaea broke apart, that's these graben faults that formed 600 million years ago. So this is the evidence of the widening of an older ocean before the Atlantic that we call the Iapetus. And so these are the rift valleys that opened up to form that ocean and broke apart Rodinia when we drifted off from the South Pole and towards the equator. And then you can see these strike slips, and that's what this A and T, or the rock is moving relative to either away from you and you're looking at the cross section, or towards you. And so you can see that the 320 million years ago is when we think the Tugaloo finally reached its destination of being in Georgia. And that's what these faults brought it, this one too. And it's interesting if you see that relative to the Dahlonega Gold Belt, the Tugaloo terrane has moved towards us in our view here, yet relative to the Cat Square has moved towards us. So you can see that the Cat Square came in later than the Tugaloo. Tugaloo had ceased moving, Cat Square continued to move, and etc. So these are the graben faults of the breakup of Rodinia and the Iapetus Sea. So lots of cool information in that one cross section. So this, I wanted to go back and show you the breakup of Rodinia. And here's Georgia back as Rodinia, the South Pole. This ghost-like image is showing you perhaps there was glaciation down here. And so Georgia was covered in a glacier. And this is 650 million years ago. And so as it rifted apart, forming those graben faults, we drifted up with Georgia out here to the what is now the southeast, was southwestern part of the continent then when we straddled the equator during the Cambrian explosion of life. So now we're going to go on a tour into the Tugaloo. Yeah, I don't want to, there are no chats or anything, right? This is my little money clip. So that's about 3 inches. So you can get an idea of how big this is. This is a core from a drill hole in exploring the Beaufort Dam site for the Beaufort Dam and for Lake Lanier. So somebody like me, we go to the place where we want to build a dam, and we drill these borings across the river and onto the hillsides on either side to a depth to discern what is the rock down there, how competent is it, how deep is it, how much overburden we'll have to take, etc., so we can anchor the dam in this rock. That means our dam will never move. So this is a gneiss, and a gneiss means it's nicely layered, and you can see these layers, right? the dark and white lighter layers. And gneiss is just sediments and granite bodies and things like that sometimes, but mostly sediments that have been metamorphosed to a degree much more higher than schist. Schist rocks can turn into gneiss by just more deeply burying them, putting more pressure on them, more heat, and they turn to gneiss. So gneiss is the most competent of rocks. And competent, I mean, we could build skyscrapers to the moon from Atlanta because of the rock that underlies us is so strong. This is the gravel quarry. Lots of people, and even the company that runs this, which is Vulcan Materials, calls it a granite quarry, but it's not a granite quarry. It's a gneiss quarry. It's really just a gravel quarry. We crush it for making concrete. So if you have ever realized that there are giant holes like this all around Atlanta, and that's to build and pave all the things that we use to make concrete out of in the Atlanta area. So it takes these massive, massive holes. We were just talking before class began that humans have for quite a while been a bigger movement of materials, of earth materials, than all the erosional processes put together. We dig and haul and excavate more rock and dirt, etc., than rain and ice and waves and everything put together. So we are an agent of geology now. And that's why some would like to call this the Anthropocene, the age of humans. And that quarry is at Beaver Ruin, and I'm on the overlook. You can go to the overlook 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's outside the gated area. So if you are on Beaver Ruin near 285, on your right is the entrance to this quarry. As soon as you pull in, you'll turn to the right before the main gate and find the overlook if you ever want to go there. So this is Arabia Mountain. I know many of you have been out there. It's not really a granite, it's a migmatite. It's actually a part of the Lithonia gneiss, we think. That, and we, I mean, not just, I'm not using the royal we, I'm using geologists we. And that the Lithonia gneiss has what a geologist would call facies changes within it, i.e. the rock changes within the same formation. And in this case, a migmatite means this was heated to a higher degree that part of it melted and part of it was just taffy. One of the things I like about this, I call this obviously camel rock. Can you see, does that to you look like a camel kind of hunkered down waiting for somebody to climb on and say, you know, whatever they say to get the camel to get up and go? I can't thump my tongue today. So when the Cat Square and this Carolina terrane were crashing into North America, part of their rocks were melting and then coming up as granites. And so that's where these granites came that we see in the Tugaloo terrane. This is another picture of Arabia Mountain. And look, I misspelled granite. And the granite outcrops have amazing little communities that are found nowhere else in this area of the country. And I would like to think that no matter where a granite outcrop is, it has some kind of weird little community different from the communities surrounding it, wherever it may be, tropics or whatever. It's an area that the plants and animals have to undergo a long period of drought. You know, that in between rainstorms, this lake or pond will dry up and disappear, and they have to survive in the little bit of soil that exists under there. Likewise, these plants have to take root in almost no soil. I'm sure we've one of the coolest little species that lives here is a fairy shrimp, and how they got there, I have no idea. probably in bird poo somehow. One of the cool things about Arabia Mountain is the area where they used to quarry it. One of its values was its seemingly bluish color. And it's really just a play of light on the various minerals, the dark and white, make it appear to have a bluish sheen to it. And you can see that really well here. It's mostly biotite, the dark, and the light is feldspar and quartz. So this is another granite separate from Arabia Mountain or Panola Mountain or Stone Mountain. This is called the Ben Hill granite, and this is in South Bolton. And here the rocks are, it's a much smaller body of granite. It's fully exposed on the surface. It's been weathered, I think, probably during the Pleistocene, especially by frost, freeze and thaw, and that's broken it up into like smaller house-sized to car-sized blocks. And that's me. But here's a good picture of them. And you can see the characteristic of exfoliation weathering, which likes to make rounded shapes. And that is due to the weight being removed from the rock from when it was originally formed. And now that it's on the surface, that hundreds and hundreds of tons of weight that was on it causes the rock to expand and crack along like onions peel coming off. And that's what we can see with these. All rocks have a joint pattern, and the joint pattern is in general in 3 dimensions. And one of the joint patterns for these granites is going to be this curvaceous bowl-like joint, but then there'll be vertical and horizontal joints as well. So you can see all the joints working and being eroded here. This is a great place where people have been bouldering, climbing on the boulders, and was so valued that a group of boulder enthusiasts in Atlanta made sure this property was saved and created a preserve. There are parts of it that there are houses right next door to these giant rocks, and I think about them living there because granite rocks make noises because they're always releasing that pressure, and so they're popping and cracking, and that would be disconcerting, I would think, if you live next door to it. There's a big granite outcrop in Texas that I want to go to called Enchanted Rock. And it was enchanted because of the noises it made that the Native Americans, whatever their word, that we interpreted as being enchanted, but that's why it's named that. So this is the famous Stone Mountain that we've all been to, and its big exfoliation dome. And the cool thing about Stone Mountain, and those that have gone with me to the tour of the quarry section of Stone Mountain have seen these things that happen when these molten blobs of rock are have been intruded and rising up through the overlying rock because they're hot and liquid and therefore able to rise through the solid rocks above them. And in doing that, they break off pieces of that solid rock. So you're rising up from great depth, and the first rocks you're going to hit are the amphibolites that are the metamorphosed equivalents of that rock that came out of the mid-oceanic ridge. And that's what this is, an amphibolite. And it's kind of has a schistous characteristic to it, that it's very thinly layered, but that's just due to things going on in the metamorphism of it. But to me, it kind of looks like a donkey without front legs. I don't know why I think a donkey, but I do. And that's the little donkey amphibolite, and those are called xenoliths, which is just a word that means exotic. Xeno is Greek, I think, for exotic or unusual. This is another little amphibolite xenolith for scale. In Stone Mountain, you can see a layering or that onion-like texture to the granite. And we'll talk about what these things are too also. So here's one that's more of a gneiss. So one of the rocks that surrounds Stone Mountain is the Lithonia gneiss, but there's also a more massive rock that is the general term that is now mostly called the Atlanta Group, but includes rocks like the Claremont Formation, that Beaver Ruin quarry is actually the Claremont Formation. We talked about when we were at the Big Tree Place, the Stonewall Formation and the Wahoo Creek Formation. And so those formations in the Atlanta area are called porphyroblastic, and that means that in general they have something within them that makes large crystals, but the matrix is mostly very fine grained, and we'll see some evidence of that when we go to Palisades later today in a few minutes. So this is another xenolith, one of gneiss in Stone Mountain. And so here's these, this is called an auxiliary mineral within Stone Mountain, and this is tourmaline, and it's called cat's paw because whoever the whimsical geologist was decided it looks like a cat has stepped in paint and then walked on the rock, getting little footprints on the rock. And so that's why it's called cat's paw. And the auxiliary minerals are, I think, what are telling the geologist that this granite includes sediments that melted along with the rock and the seawater that all got incorporated to create this granite. And so this is an S-type granite, a sediment included granite, versus one that's purely a magma from depth. So here's a great map. A lot of people like to think Stone Mountain underlies all of Atlanta, but it's actually very localized body, and the mountain itself sits right in here. So to give you an idea how extensive it is beyond the boundaries of what we see, it's not very extensive. These are those other formations. This is the Lithonia gneiss. I'm sorry, this is an amphibolite biotite hornblende. This is the Lithonia gneiss, and this is that porphyroblastic biotite gneiss that makes up most of the other rocks. And even the Stone Mountain is not really just a granite. They call it a monzo granite, and some call it a quartz monzonite and things like that. And monzo, I had to look it up, just means it has a lot of maybe a little more biotite or the mica fragment of what granites are a definition of a quartz at this content, a feldspars at this contents, and then micas at this contents. And if you vary them a little bit, then you vary the name a little bit. So here's a view of Atlanta from Stone Mountain. And one of the things I'm wanting you to see here is how relatively flat the Atlanta area is, even though you and I know driving it, there's nothing flat about it. But in the view overall, it looks like a flat plain. And it is a flat plain that is now dissected by the streams that make it a rolling, hilly place that we know. And this dissected plain was eroded a long time ago by the Chattahoochee River and its various tributaries. And we'll see evidence of that in the Chattahoochee today, in its meanders and things like that. So this is kind of a peneplain. And that just means that all the mountaintops or all the hilltops seem to be at the same elevation. This is right near my house. I can go here every day, and I do go here a lot. To me, this little creek is like a taste of North Georgia in my neighborhood. And this is the creek that's headwaters are Perimeter Mall area. I call it Sproul Creek. I think it's called Perimeter Creek, but that seems boring to me. I like the name Sproul because that's the people who used to live there. That was the dairy farmers who once owned Perimeter Mall and all of Perimeter Center. One of the characteristics of the Brevard Zone, and these rocks around my house are in the Brevard Zone, are that they're, one is that they have what we call button schist. And button schist just means that some of that porphyroblastic the larger mineral rocks that were in that finer matrix, they got stretched so far that they broke apart. And so they look like buttons rather than a continuous vein of rock. And that's why they're called the button schist. And this is button schist. Another characteristic of the Brevard is that there are these long linear ridges that parallel the fault line. And that may be because that's the motion that was going on is like this. And so there's long dragged out formations topped in quartzite and such. So the creek was there before it had eroded into this ridge. The ridge is a structure that was once deeply buried, but now the creek has flowed for so long and the area is uplifted some that the creek has incised itself straight through one of these ridges and formed this canyon of Squirrel Creek. A beautiful little piece of the Appalachian Mountains of North Georgia in my backyard almost. I hope you're jealous. We could go there and hike up there. There's a sewer right away that goes through it. So this is the upper part of Lake Lanier, and what I want you to focus on is this incredible meander curve in the Chattahoochee River is drowned by the lake. And that's evident in the Chattahoochee, you can also tell by the nature of how it looks in this drowned format of a lake, and that it's entrenched or incised into the peneplain that we talked about. And even these meander curves are incised into the plain that existed when these meanders formed on the river. So these meanders did not form with the river incised. They formed at some time earlier above on that peneplain that I was talking about. And then with this rejuvenated uplift or whatever has occurred, then those meanders were incised into the surrounding area, and we can still see them in the rock because of the water. So that's one of the places. So this is the Chattahoochee still. This is Bull Sluice or Morgan Falls and Bull Sluice Lake. So here's the Roswell Road crossing the Chattahoochee, Holcomb Bridge. So these are big meanders on the Chattahoochee, again, that formed when the river was flowing across a broader floodplain. And it's now been incised into the rocks. And that floodplain was at that higher level that you can generally see from Stone Mountain and the other mountains around here. And all the mountains around Atlanta, Kennesaw, and we'll go to each of them, are what are called monadnocks. They're mountains that are isolated by erosion and stick out like a pimple on the landscape. You know, there are no other mountains in general in their area. And so I think you can see these, really sweeping meanders of the Chattahoochee River. Even the tributaries, and we're going to zoom in on this area of Vickery Creek and Big Creek, because that's another key thing I want to talk about today is stream piracy. So we're going to first look at Vickery Creek, and this is Vickery Creek there next to Roswell, and the Chattahoochee is right here. So again, the creek has these broad meanders telling us again that this creek was flowing across a broader floodplain and meandering back and forth as it joined to the Chattahoochee. The other thing about Big Creek, and here's a map of Big Creek, here's 400. So this is, the orientation is weird that north is somewhere up in this direction, up this way. But here's Big Creek and the meanders of it. You can see some are bigger than others. But if you are ever in this area, and I know we are often, you should note that this valley is really broad, and yet the creek, Big Creek, is not that big. The Big Creek did not form that valley that this creek is now flowing across. What I really think has happened is the Etowah River once flowed where the Big Creek is and into the Chattahoochee. And since the Gulf of Mexico opened up, it caused the rivers that flow out via Mobile Bay to eat up and erode more quickly than the Chattahoochee, because the Chattahoochee is in a crystalline rock, and those rivers in Alabama were in sedimentary rocks more than here. And they could even follow the sedimentary rocks of the valley and ridge, and therefore steal the headwaters, the Etowah, from the Chattahoochee and make them a part of the Coosa River system. And I think that's what's happened here. The Etowah once flowed and joined the Chattahoochee, but has been stolen by the Coosa River. So this is the Chattahoochee in the Palisades section. These are the buildings near and around the new baseball field in Cobb County. And you'll see this is what I call the Great Bend in the river, because it really takes a 90-degree turn as it hits this ridge of topped in Chattahoochee quartzite. But this is an entrenched meander of the river when it was flowing up here somewhere long ago. And it's now cutting through these rocks and making these shoals. You notice this seeming path through the rocks. That's not natural. That was blasted through by barge boaters who used to connect to all the little mills that were up and down the Chattahoochee Valley via the river, because it was so difficult to get up and down the cliffs alongside the river. And each stream that flows into the Chattahoochee has to also erode down to get into the valley of the Chattahoochee. We're going to see more Palisades pictures for a little bit. This is that Great Bend again. I'm where what I call the rock house. It's a rock foundation of a summer cottage, basically, of the people who lived up on the hillsides back in the early 20s and 30s, maybe, and into the 40s. They've since let the houses go to ruin, and then eventually Jimmy Carter made sure that the United States government bought this property and turned it into the Chattahoochee National Recreation Area. So there are these little islands, and the river takes this hard right turn, 90-degree turn. Chattahoochee quartzite is making these ridges. This is the ridge that the diving rock is on, and we'll see it. There are lots of cool rock shelters throughout East Palisades. This is the deepest one. This is a schist, and you know that because it looks like the pages of a book, the layers of the rock. And so, you don't think too often of rock shelters being formed in schist, but because of the way these rocks have been uplifted, they all point to the northwest and tilt at about a degree angle to the southeast. And that tilting has allowed this differential erosion to create these overhanging rock shelters. So that's the deepest one, but this is the longest one. And this is the one behind the Table Rock. And all the names I use are names I invented in playing in these woods as a kid. And not that I alone invented them. My friends and I, in playing, we invented these names for these places, so we knew what we were talking about, that we wanted to run to Table Rock and stop and have a smoke before we continued to the rock house, before we continued to the diving rock to dive off the rock. And we would come up this cliff right here and then go around this edge, and Table Rock's right over here. But you can see, you could easily camp underneath this rock ledge, and Native Americans did. I don't know if any archaeological studies have been done in East Palisades. I know in other areas of the river they have, and know that there were Native Americans using these as periodic hunting lodges or something to that effect. This Table Rock, it's a garnet schist. So again, the schist, it's got thin layers. It's chock full of garnets. And they look like little BBs to marble size, brown weathered iron balls. And they're all over the ground because they're more resistant. General matrix is fine grained and indiscernible mineral grains, but then the garnets are always bigger and show out. Another thing that happens to rocks on rivers is pothole formation. And this is due to just a little gravel getting caught in like a place like this, in a little crack or low area, and starts to get swirled by water when it's higher. Eventually it creates such a basin that more gravel will get stuck in it, and it'll get swirled around and eventually drill right through the rock. So the one previously is, I was talking about that channel that was blasted out of the rocks, is right there. And we could slide through that hole into the river and then swim down the river. And we would call that being flushed down the toilet. And that was the toilet bowl. This one I call the window rock, because when it's low water, I like this effect that the sun shining through it illuminates the water window wood. So those are my little names for things. So this is the actual diving rock, and that's what I'm measuring how high it is. So it's only like 16 feet high. And I say only a 3-meter diving board, which is the high pool, is 9 feet. But if you spring off of it, you're easily going to go 16 feet high. So it's like going off a high dive. So not a big deal. There's a place further up river and in that Bull Sluice Lake behind Morgan Falls that was called Hunt Cliff, that in my teenage days, we could get there via the roads on Hunt Cliff, because they had not yet built houses above the rocks there. But those rocks go up 100 feet above the water. Not that I went off 100 feet, but could have. Went off high enough in more ways than one. So again, I want to talk about the porphyroblastic nature of the rocks in this area. This is Rottenwood Creek. Do y'all know where Rottenwood Creek? It kind of goes right underneath the interchange of 75 and 285. And there's Cobb County has a good trail system that connects to the Chattahoochee National Recreation Area via a trail that goes down Rottenwood Creek. And in Rottenwood Creek, you're going to find these giant feldspars. This is sodium feldspars and white. One of the characteristics of feldspar is that it likes to weather in these 90-degree blocks. And that's really a reflection of its atomic structure and its mineral structure. But you can find it, and it's a more of a waxy kind of texture than quartz, because you're going to see quartz and feldspar a lot together, and differentiating them is generally hard for those who don't realize that, well, this one's waxy, and the quartz, even though there are white quartzes that look kind of waxy too. Rocks are tough. So this is pink feldspar, potassium feldspar, and this is also at Palisades, and on that same western side of the river. But this is a rock that you can see from the East Palisades, and it's pink feldspar. And again, it has this characteristic almost 90-degree mineral cleavage. I was trying to think of the word. Now this is back on Table Rock, and this is one of the garnets that's sticking out of Table Rock. I've blown it up super large so you can see it, but it's about the size of your thumb. And unfortunately, the garnets or the rocks are so churned and weathered that the garnets are rusted through. So they're like I was saying, they're like brown BBs. And the way you can tell that you've got a garnet in your hand is that for the size it is, it seems awfully heavy. And that's because it's made out of iron, and it is heavy. So you'll have this little tiny marble in your hand, but it feels like, 2.5 marbles or 3 marbles. So it's illegal to collect garnets, so don't practice what I practice, but practice what I preach. Don't pick up any garnets out there. So this is one of the main tributaries of the Chattahoochee in the Atlanta area. This is Sweetwater Creek, and it kind of resembles that Sproul Creek I was talking about, in that it is eroding through another ridge along the Brevard Zone, but it is a much bigger creek, obviously. And it may have even been an older, this may have been the stream that once drained what is now drained by the Coosa River tributaries, i.e. the Oostanala, the Coosawattee, and the Conasauga rivers, and the Etowah. But if the Etowah was going into the Chattahoochee at the Victory Creek, then the waters that would become the Oostanala, the Conasauga, and the Coosawattee were maybe coming into the Chattahoochee here. And because they weren't yet eroded to going into the Coosa. The Chattahoochee was instead turning and still dumping into the Black Warrior Basin that we talked about in the first slide. One of the really, there's such a great fall of the water in this canyon-ish gorge that it's been utilized, the water power has been utilized a long time. There's a huge mill that was once here and operated during the Civil War. All the people who worked there were considered enemies of the nation and treated as prisoners of war, and were hauled up to the Ohio, Indiana area. And my understanding is very few of the people who worked there, and they were mostly women because all the men were in the Confederate armies, never came home because they would eventually meet men that they would end up marrying and therefore not move back to Georgia. So one of the types of casualties of war. So what I wanted to show you, this is in this Sweetwater Creek region, but look at the intricacy of folding represented in this rock. And you can get an idea of how hot, how much pressure must have been on this rock to make it so flexible that it flowed like taffy and could make folds like this. That should blow your mind. And now it's hard that you could barely break it with a hammer. So here's another monadnock in the greater Atlanta area, Kennesaw. And Kennesaw, like Arabia Mountain, is a migmatite. So another area that part of the rock was melted almost completely, and the other part was still that taffy-like. And when you get to the top, that's what you find is these, again, it's mostly a fine matrix that you can't really see any minerals in. And some of them look like they've, almost been whipped, that they're this torturous, but they're sticking up vertically from what their original bedding plane must have been. And these were all once sediments. And so it could be relic bedding planes from that. Something you can tell about this rock is how long it's been exposed because of the lichen covering it. Okay. Excuse me. This is the view of Atlanta from Kennesaw, and this is Dobbins and Lockheed. Kennesaw has great views in every direction. And I guess you can guess what that is, but that's Stone Mountain. And again, I want to just, look how level this peneplain is. I mean, it's almost perfectly level. And we're talking, what, I don't know, 15, 17, 18 miles between Kennesaw and Stone Mountain. But this is the plain that was eroded before the streams became incised and when they used to meander. That's my dance. This is the last monadnock, I think. Well, I might go to one more. But this is a place called Indian Seats on Suwanee Mountain, which is also called coal mountain, and I'm not sure why there's so many places around Atlanta that have multiple names, but they do. But this is called the Indian Seats. This is a really great place to go on a cold, clear day because you can see all the way to the Great Smoky Mountains from there. This picture is not on that day. It's too hazy. It must be closer to summer or warm enough that it's, lots of water vapor in the air. Cold days, you're going to have less water vapor in the air and you can see further. And you can see this distinct line of mountains that sticks up well above the other mountains, and that's the Smoky Mountains. And that's hundreds of miles away. So I had said that one of the characteristics of the Tugaloo terrane is that it has lots of granite bodies. And this is the one most utilized, the Elberton granite. It looks almost like a marble quarry. It's such a starkly white granite, and the white is from both the feldspar and quartz. The darker minerals that you see are the muscovites and biotites in it. And these are the size of the blocks that they would cut and ship out on, I guess, flatbed trucks. And so I wanted to use one of these to look at the size of the stones used in the Great Pyramids to see how far we've come in hauling blocks. Are we more or less efficient? So I came up with this picture. So I used these guys standing on the outside of the pyramid to then shrink this photo to match his height with these guys' height to get the idea that this block is about like these blocks, and these blocks are all limestone, and there are thousands and thousands of them, and millions perhaps. But the idea that there are millions of, that the whole pyramid is built this way is not true. My understanding that they built, as they built up, they built lots of what would be called crib structures that they could fill with the detritus that from shaping these stones. So it's mostly rubble fill, but the infrastructure within to hold where the chambers were and the hallways and things, they built out of granite. And that's what this is sticking up. This is the arches above one of the entrances into the Great Pyramid. And that's the granite size I wanted to compare to our granite. So these things are like 4 times the size of this, and yet they not only moved this granite from 500 miles away, but then lifted it and placed it and cut it in these rhombic, octahedral. They're not squares, they're rhombic. Is that what the word? But anyway, you get the idea. But you can see that they were using architecture, engineering to shed the weight of this structure off this entrance. And that's why these granite blocks are angled like this. But I wanted you to see this comparison of the blocks from Elberton to the blocks used, 2,500 years ago. No, 4,500 years ago. So this is the last Monadnock. This is Yonah Mountain, a big quartz outcrop quartzite. It's alone, separate from the mountains to the west and north of it. The Army Rangers use this to climb. There's a parking lot down here and a trail that goes up here. I'm afraid I might even not be able to make that. I've wanted to, but I'm kind of fearful of going and not making it. Anyway, and if you've read this, then you know that Monadnock is named for a mountain in New Hampshire. But the Monadnocks around Atlanta are really more starkly isolated than both Yonah or Monadnock Mountain in New Hampshire. And so this is another page out of Dr. Lacefield's book about the lost worlds in Alabama rocks. And he's talking about the Tennessee River. And what he's talking about is that the Tennessee River seems to be multiple rivers that over time got put together. And he talks that one once 100 million years ago eroded, maybe like I was saying, to Sweetwater Creek. And then at another stage, it eroded down to the Coosa, but then the Coosa, or at least to the Alabama. And then eventually it got captured by a river after ice sheets melted away from the north, got captured by a river that flowed towards the Ohio. And it even had this fourth exit out this way. So weird things can happen to what seemingly is just a river flowing across the earth. And that's what I wanted to get in your head, because there are some weird things that have happened with the Chattahoochee River. So here's a map of Northeast Georgia. Here's Clarksville, Toccoa, where Toccoa Falls is, where the Tugaloo Gorge is, the Chattooga River, the Yonah Lake, the Tugaloo River, the Savannah River. So at one time, these two rivers were headwaters of the Chattahoochee. And again, look at the meandering of the Chattooga River. Well, it's in the mountains now, incised into the mountains. But when it was making these meanders, it was not incised into the mountains. Likewise, the Tallulah River has great meanders, as seen in these in this Lake Rayburn. So these rivers once flowed to that peneplain that the Chattahoochee was meandering across, because there were Pangaean mountains in the way. There was no Savannah River. But once the Atlantic Ocean opened, the Savannah River began to form. And not only did it erode and capture other rivers, but it reversed the flow of some of those rivers. Like the Tugaloo was probably a tributary that flowed north and into the Chattahoochee. But now the Savannah River has captured it and eaten it and caused it to reverse flow. Dr. Lacefield talks about that there's still evidence in some of the Alabama valleys north of Birmingham that show the rocks were being deposited at the top of them with the rivers flowing to the north and later and into that Black Warrior Basin. And today, now those rivers are flowing to the south. Likewise, in Georgia, rivers like the Oconee and the Ocmulgee now flow to the south and southeast, but were once rivers flowing out of those Pangaean mountains and into the Chattahoochee River to the northwest. So I put this elevation to show you how deeply the Savannah River is cut. That at Clarksville, the Sequoia River, the Chattahoochee are about 1280. The gap between these is about 1,500 feet, so about 220 feet only higher. And that these rivers are now deep, much more deeply entrenched than the Chattahoochee. And part of that is that the power of the Chattahoochee was stolen away from the Savannah. And that power that the Savannah generated by being a shorter route to the sea gave these rivers the power to carve the Tallulah Gorge and to carve the canyon that the Chattooga River flows through. Toccoa Falls and the Toccoa Creek is also a stream that once flowed to the Chattahoochee, but has been stolen by the Savannah River. And a characteristic of stream piracy in some instances is waterfalls, that this shows it actively stealing this water from some older drainage basin that was up here. We know that's also happened to the Amicalola River. And there's a thing in the roadside geology of Georgia that talks specifically about that stream piracy at the Amicalola Falls. So one of the things we know, one of the reasons we know that this Tallulah Gorge is a young gorge is that it's so narrow. Narrow enough that Walinda walked across it on a tide wire. It's in places it's less than 1,000 feet from rim to rim, and it's almost 800 feet deep. Most places at least 600 feet deep, but it's only the fourth deepest gorge in the eastern or east of the Rockies. And I think the ones that are deeper are perhaps the New River in West Virginia and its gorge, the Pine, I think it's Pine Creek and not Pine River in Pennsylvania, and I've been to these places. And there's a state park on either side of Pine Creek. And that one, it got its power from the draining of the glaciers. And then the third, I think, is the Genoese River in New York, and where it's flowing through Letchworth State Park. So this is the fourth deepest gorge in the east. It's been billed as the deepest. You know, Georgia likes to say, we got the biggest granite, we got the highest waterfall in the deep. Well, none of them are true. It's all propaganda. So here's the waterfalls. Another characteristic, as I said, of stream piracy. And there's a series of falls cutting through. And the rocks of the Tugaloo Gorge are quartzite. So one of the hardest rocks to erode, and yet the Tugaloo, due to its power, has cut like a knife right through it. And one of the reasons the Chattooga and the Tugaloo have so much power is the rainfall in northeast Georgia and that part of North Carolina and South Carolina. That's little area of the headwaters of now the Savannah River get more rain than any place east of the Cascade Range in Washington and Oregon. So well over 60 inches of rain falls, 48 inches in general fall in Atlanta, but another full foot of rain falls up here, giving the power to this river. We have stolen the power of this river in Georgia Power has, I should say, in generating electricity. So rarely does even what used to probably be the minimum flow before the power plant gets to flow through the valley. I imagine that at one time the river was at least as high as these rocks are cleaned off, not these, but these down here along the river in flood. So the floods would have been, 10, 15 feet deep through the middle of the river, flowing through here, eroding the rock. So we've probably arrested or stopped erosion altogether. Joint pattern in the Tugaloo Gorge quartzite. I probably should rush along again. I'm pointing out this seemingly plain above where the river is today. That river that was meandering up here on a broader plain. This is Hurricane Shoals, one of the bigger waterfalls, but you can see the rocks are quite jumbled, quite ancient. I want to say some of the rocks in the Tugaloo Gorge area are 1 billion years old. I don't think these are, but they're up there. And these were giant, this could have been a barrier island sequence at one time. It's predominantly a quartzite, so it's sand, it's silica. So that evolution of landforms I've talked about recently, of how everywhere you are on the planet seems to have gone through all the stages that we see, from deep oceanic trench to tallest mountain. The gorge, and you can see kind of it meanders. And this is a walkway when you go the 300 steps down to the bottom. I don't think I'll ever go down there again. This is Georgia's highest state park, Black Rock Mountain. And it's called Black Rock because it's a biotite gneiss that's intricately folded. And so it appears kind of darkish and look black from a distance. But that intricate folding is also represented in the waves of mountain ridges that the Appalachians erode to. And this is a view from one of the overlooks at Black Rock Mountain. And I happened to capture a rare thunderbird flying overhead on the day I was there. And they're still there. This is the Eastern Continental Divide. So that ridge that follows DeKalb Avenue and Ponce de Leon, Decatur from Atlanta, and then turns to the north and northwest at Stone Mountain to get to Norcross, and then follows the railroad towards Toccoa, eventually gets up here in Black Rock Mountain. And that Eastern Continental Divide is dividing waters that flow to the Atlantic directly versus those that flow to the Atlantic via the Gulf of Mexico, either the rivers that directly empty into the Gulf or rivers that then flow to the Mississippi. And in this area, this is the Tennessee River has eroded far enough into the Pangaean Mountains to take the waters all the way to Ohio before then turning them into the Mississippi and south. So one would think, and again, this is why the Savannah River was able to capture headwaters of the Chattahoochee, is it's such a shorter route from here down the Savannah that the Savannah is eroding more quickly than the Tennessee River and will eventually move this continental divide to the north and west. This is Nacoochee Mound and Yonah Mountain in the distance, just outside of Helen, Georgia. And a lot of people think this was a Cherokee town, but it was really originally a Muskogee town. The Cherokee were only in the mountains of the North Carolina, say when DeSoto came. Not that he came to here, but the reason there is a mound city here is this is on the southeastern exit of one of the main passes through the Appalachian. So you would use Unicoi Gap to get to the Little Tennessee River, or the headwaters of the, well, I guess it's really to the Hiwassee River and the Ocoee River. But anyway, there's a pass there. So you have a crossroads here, and a village would eventually form and become a mound center. And in this area, mound sitters were called by the Muskogee a tawa, or a high tower. We thought high tower, but it was in what we call Etowah today. I've just recently learned that the Algonquins in the Northeast, what they were telling the French people was that one of their towns was close, and they used the word Canada. That's what Canada means, is town. Like a town, Etowah means town here. So I thought that was cool. So this is my last slide. It's a night view of Atlanta from the old Atlantic Steel facility. I forget what we call that now, Atlantic Station. And anyway, Atlanta, like I said, is built on this volcanic terrain that's the volcanoes were active maybe 600 million years ago, but it was strike, slip, faulted to here and slid here 320 million years ago. And only 15 million years ago did the top of Stone Mountain peak out. And so it's in the last 15 million years has exposed Stone Mountain. I'm done.
Chuck, that's incredible. You have to get that book published. I already have a name for you. Follow Chuck as he grows up through Georgia.
We were going to call it Deep Time, which I liked. And I love Lost Worlds in Alabama Rocks. That's a great title.
We got to get that.
So I would recommend, I recommend getting that. It's because it's so close to Georgia that you can just use it to say, oh yeah, this happened here. So
Chuck, it must be, you know so much every time you're at one of these locations and you see kids and adults wandering through. I'm sure it must be frustrating because they don't know anything about what they're seeing pretty much. Do you, I'm sure you must round them up and educate them occasionally, or always?
Unfortunately for them, yes, sometimes I do. And unfortunately for whoever I am, I do that too. My brother and his sons, being from the Northeast, you don't talk to strangers. And so my habit of talking to people when I'm out hiking and things, they're like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, you're gonna get killed.
This is incredible.
Like, y'all are crazy. But yeah, I will tell people, you're walking on an ocean floor. And they look at me like, what kind of maniac are you? Like, a geologist. We're crazy. Yeah, I saw something. It was like it was before and after pictures, and one was somebody before and then after alcohol, one after crack or something, one after heroin, and then there was one after geology, and he was just smiling. So It was the best of addictions to have.
All right, there must be some comments or questions. We can't let Chuck get away this easy.
I usually leave them stymied. I hope that you're just, wow.
It's true.
I don't know what to think.
Margita is asking, any field trips planned?
Where do you want to go? Why were you not here last week? Yeah, where do you want to go? Let's go. You want to go to Palisades? You're not on, Susan, but you're gesticulating and
Susan, you can unmute.
Arabia is beautiful in the spring, you know, with the diamorpha.
Right.
Yeah.
That's one of the rare species of plants she's speaking.
Yeah. And you know, the Palisades, up to the Palisades any point in time.
Okay. Palisades, I would recommend we go during the week rather than a weekend because it gets really crowded. I was amazed at how uncrowded our Daniel Johnson place was on a Saturday or a Sunday.
Right.
But I know Palisades will fill up quickly, and then that's a problem that
And there are
people.
two areas of the Palisades, so probably the one that does not require walking up the steep to the diving rock, for example. I don't know.
Right.
I'm
Yeah,
just making a suggestion because
part-
there are a lot of people here who haven't been on your hikes, so you know.
Yeah, the parking lot at Indian Trail is basically on top, and you don't really have to get off the top if you want. Whereas the one that's next to Long Island Creek, and I can't remember what that parking lot's called, but you can walk around the river there, but and you could access that deep rock shelter from that parking lot more easily than from the top. But anyway,
Chuck,
maybe when I get back
I'll go
from
anyway.
Portugal,
Ellen Patrick
nice.
wants
hopefully.
Ellen Patrick wants to know what happened to the Lapidus Sea.
The Iapetus Sea,
Oh,
it got, is that what you're talking about? The ocean that opened up when Rodinia broke apart? It got crushed between Gondwana and Laurasia. So North America and Europe and Africa and Antarctica, South America crushed the Iapetus Sea and turned it into the Tugaloo terrane and the Dahlonega gold belt and the Cartoogechaye and the Cowrock and the Cat Square. And those are all ancient Iapetus Sea. And the Alps are the ancient Tethys Sea that got crushed between Africa and Europe. The Himalayas are the ancient Tethys Sea that got crushed between India and Asia. So that's what happened to the ancient oceans. And they may come back, you know.
Elaine wants to know, why does Georgia have so many Monadnock mountains?
I would like to think that it was because we spent so much time in the tropics and therefore had a really high rate of erosion. Yet, New England was also in the tropics, but I'm not really sure. Maybe we have more resistant rocks somehow in the migmatites and the quartzites to allow that there to be these remnant, that the mountains are showing you that the ground surface was much higher at one time, just like buttes and mesas show you that out west.
Anita and Max want to know if geologists are hired before construction is done in certain areas.
Yes, they're in general a integral part of geotechnical firms and engineering firms. Like my schooling, I really should have been somebody who builds dams, canals, harbor structures, things like that. But the environmental field was the big hiring thing going on when I was graduating. So I turned my training into hydrogeology and therefore studying groundwater flow and the fate and transport of chemicals and things like that in groundwater. But yeah, I should be in Indonesia building dams. I'm glad I did. I'd rather clean up has waste.
Coral,
It feels more Buddhist.
Coral.
Well, the more I listen to Chuck, the more I realize that I have always said geography makes history, but geology makes geography. And therefore that is a basis of all creation practically. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
Class 8 will be my attempt to convince you that everything we do is due to geology. And I know I haven't done a good job, but one of the things I came to realize, because I loved history and I loved geography, and geology is essentially in its simplest format, the history of geography.
Yeah.
And that's what these recent guys have, shown us in their paleo maps. It's a lava lamp of altering, changing, ever-changing landscapes, and come to the realization that wherever you live on the globe has gone through a cycle that has seen every environment you can think of, from a deep ocean trench to the top of the highest mountain, to a plain, to a beach, to whatever it might be. We've seen it all.
Hey,
So
Mary,
fascinating.
Yeah, this is a request to you, George. I missed Chuck's program because DeKalb County decided to show up today and tear up my woods. So I just got back in the house.
Bummer.
Could you send me the video?
sure.
Thank you.
It'll cost you plenty, but you're worth it.
Oh, my goodness.
Chuck is worth
And I don't get any of that.
it.
I thought-
Okay, well, I've asked everyone to unmute so we can thank Chuck and get on to the next class. Chuck, thanks for a great one.
Thank you. Have fun.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fascinating
next
as
week.
always.
See you in the funny papers.
All about us.
Thank you. Very nice. Very nice.
Oh,